Hands of the week. If you're ever in a big spot against someone and you're a little nervous, do you ever try to picture them naked? 25, 50, 100. The $100 straddle's on, but we're playing with a $50 ante. So it's 25, 50, 100 with a $50 ante. A very good reg opens to 300 under the gun. MP, recreational calls, cutoff recreational calls. I am on the button with 8-7 of diamonds, kind of the first interesting decision point here. Talk about what you're thinking here in the spot with 8-7.
Yeah, well, when we're squeezing, in general, we're going to want to have a pretty linear range because...
Squeezing. Can you define squeezing versus 3-betting?
Yeah, so a squeeze is going to be someone has raised and then someone else has called, and we're going to put in a 3-bet ourselves. Whereas just a pure 3-bet would be someone opens, folded to us, and we're there deciding whether we want to put more money in. The reason we want to be a bit more linear, which is good, best, and bestest hands, is because, well, there's just more people in the pot. The likelihood that we go post-flop goes up.
So when you're very likely to see a flop, when your opponents are likely to call, you want to go linear. We just want to choose very good hands. 8-7 of diamonds doesn't really fall squarely into that range, so we call here. And the big blind comes along as well, so we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 ways to the flop, and the flop is 10-8-6 with 2 diamonds. So we have middle pair and a flush draw. Big blind checks, pre-flop raiser checks, MP and cutoff checks, so it comes all the way around to us. First decision point here.
When it's checked to these recreational players, after the player who had the initiative pre-flop has checked, they are going to have a hard time on a wet dynamic board like 10-8-6 from slow playing. So if they have a hand 10x, flush draw, or better, I think there's a very high likelihood those two players are going to put in a bet. And the fact that they didn't bet, I would say it almost discounts them from continuing in this hand most of the time. At Hungry Horse Poker, we talk about reasons to bet, particularly multi-way. And those tend to be when we have thick value, when we block the nuts, and when we can make the nuts. And 8-7 of diamonds here, I don't know if it falls perfectly into any one of those buckets, but it has a little bit going on in almost all of them.
Yeah, it's got a little piece of the 3, right? And I think one of the reasons I decided to bet here was because it's pretty good for us if we can just fold out hands like King Jack offsuit, or like King Queen, or Ace 9. Hands like that, just getting this equity to fold out when we're so multi-way. So I decided just to bet small here. I don't really think there's a reason to go huge here.
Right. From a theoretical framework, multi-way, we tend to almost always be using smaller sizes because we tend not to be bluffing that much. And when we have fewer bluffs, we tend to need to use a smaller size to incentivize people to call.
So I go 400, I go quarter pot. Big blind folds, and now the under the gun pre-flop raiser check raises to 1600 to 4x here. MP and cutoff get out of the way as expected. Back to us here. We always like to talk about thoughts before decision here. So my thoughts are, okay, this isn't entirely unexpected. And the reason why it's not entirely unexpected is he's got multiple recreational players behind him on a wet dynamic board. This board is likely to get stabbed at a high frequency if he checks. So he can kind of check his range here and just kind of see what happens. And if he does have some thick value here, seems like a pretty good spot to check raise and put in a bunch more money against some inelastic ranges.
The bit that maybe we didn't touch on already is that we're deep, right?
We started this hand 30k effective.
We're playing 300 big blind poker here, and I think a lot of players at the table were pretty deep.
I think at this point, we don't really have a whole lot of fold equity. When he goes for the check raise on the flop, even if we did have thick value here, against a player who's capable of betting thinly here, he's going to keep betting on clean runouts. He's going to keep bluffing with his big draws. So I don't really know that bet 3-betting really accomplishes much, even with the value portion of our range. So I kind of just like flatting range here against an aggressive, strong thinking player. Now I wouldn't be thinking this way against a fish, but just kind of playing both our semi-bluffs and our value, putting those into the same bucket and making our decision tree a little bit easier.
Yeah, and I think sometimes a simple strategy played well will outperform a more complex strategy that you are just liable to get wrong.
Yeah, okay, so I call. And the turn is the blankest of blanks. Some might say innocuous.
You would say innocuous.
Well, some other people might say that. It's an offsuit deuce, and now he bets 5.6k into 4.8. Thoughts here?
Well, I think this is a pretty polarizing size, right? He's gone for an overbet. when a blank card comes in theory that changes really none of the best hands, often the theoretically correct strategy would be to say, I'm going to make you pay with an overbet.
Same kind of thoughts I had on the flop here. I just think calling here works really nicely with both the high equity kind of draw portion of our range and the thick value portion of our range.
If you raise now, I'm not really sure there's any raise size, but all in, well, you then negate any advantage of being in position. You have a good sense of the range that gets to the river. Some sets, some draws.
What about overpairs? When we go quarter pot on the flop and then turns a complete blank, don't you think possibly overpairs could still be taking this line for value on such a wet dynamic board?
I think this player is capable of recognizing that there are just a lot of draws. It's quite difficult for us to fold all of our equity on this turn, right? Like, that doesn't feel very appealing, and he's able to have a large sizing that forces us with some hands that are just quite inelastic. Also, he recognizes that there was 3 recreational players in this hand. If we did have a hand like 10s, 8s, 6s, or 10-8, we might have been pretty incentivized on this flop to size up. We might have bet more than 400 with our very thickest of value.
Yeah, so it kind of gives him the green light. We like to call. Pot is 16,000 going to the river, and the river is the deuce of diamonds. So pairs the bottom card and makes us a 8-high flush. And now he checks.
So obviously, first thing to do is celebrate. Subtly.
Well, the good thing is this isn't a straight, so I didn't have to do the...
You didn't do the... Right. This is a spot where I think I would expect him to have a lot of checks on this river.
Can you explain why?
When a board-changing card comes after he has said he had a strong hand on previous streets, a lot of the time that's going to be a spot where his thick value has been downgraded significantly, and some of our draws have obviously come in, and therefore I think he's more likely to slow down and check.
The question is here in our shoes. What exactly do we get value from?
I think in our shoes, it's hard to have a bluff. Getting paid when we have value, when it's perceived that we don't have a lot of bluffs, is a much harder story to sell. We're going to struggle to get thin value versus hands like aces, kings, queens, or jacks.
Because what are our bluffs here? Jack-9 suited, maybe?
Right. That calls an overbet on the turn on a 2-diamond board.
So on this river, what do I really get value from? And I know that sounds insane, right? I've got a flush. But his range is going to look like boats.
Perhaps some flushes.
And overpairs. And when we bet, I think we get called by the flushes. We get jammed on by the boats. And the overpairs is interesting. From his spot here, check jamming with the overpairs and turning them into a bluff, trying to get all the flushes to fold, is a pretty cool play.
He's not paying with pocket aces here, even with the ace of diamond.
And if we pick a large size, he's never going to run the bluff because it looks like he doesn't have fold equity.
Right. And I think that's the bit that's so interesting about this hand, is that in theory, when we are in position on the river, there are very few small bets. But this might be one of those interesting situations where betting small on this river allows us to bet call and win a 60k pot against a bluff, rather than betting, say, 8 to 10k on the river and either getting a fold or getting jammed on and absolutely hating our life, because when he jams on us after we bet 10k, I'm not sure he's picking the aces with the ace of diamonds anymore because he doesn't perceive himself to have any fold equity.
Yeah, check raising to 23k after a 10k river bet seems a little bit suicidal. Whereas like if we bet 5k here, check raising to 23k, a little bit scarier, right? Like for us, at least, this is one of those rare spots where I think if we do have pocket 8s or pocket 6s or pocket 10s here, I also think betting 5k, 4k here on this river is great, because not only does he check jam some of the overpairs and turn those into bluffs when we bet 5k on this river, but I mean, maybe if we bet 4 or 5k here, he also just check jams the ace high flush, figuring he's always good, right? So we get the bluffs to jam, we get some of the worst value to jam, and like if we just bet big, like none of that good stuff happens. The other thing here is like, let's just say he just turns like aces with a diamond and kings with a diamond into a bluff. All of a sudden we're talking about 6 bluff combos. Let's say he also has 10-8 suited, turns that one into a bluff. So
another 2 combos in this spot.
So we're talking about 8 bluff combos. Well, how many value combos are there?
Right.
When we have 8-7 of diamonds, we block pocket 8 specifically. Well, there's 1 combo of 8s, 3 combos of 10s, 3 combos of 6s. and maybe some combos of like ace-x of diamonds as well. So all of a sudden we're talking about a range that's going to be...
It's close to a 1-to-1, right?
Yeah.
Like, it really is. Like, he could be very easily bluffing half the time here into a pot that is pretty substantial, and we would be getting an incredible price on our call.
In game, I had some of these thoughts. Some of the thoughts were, wow, he's just going to be bluffing here a lot. But I couldn't put that final piece together, which was, hey, if he's going to be bluffing a lot, I just bet call.
Right.
I just bet call here. I have the hand to bet call. And I think maybe, to be completely honest with you, one of the things that got to me was 30K effective. Do I really want to play a 60K
Real
pot
money.
with
Right.
an 8 high flush, which in this situation is essentially just a bluff catcher if we get check raised? When you are playing bigger than you normally play, it's really, really important to not let the size of the game kind of affect your decision-making process and just think in terms of big blinds.